This meeting is called to order. We will have a moment for prayer or reflection. Thank you.
Good evening. First, we have adoption of the agenda.
Are there any additions? Seeing no additions, the agenda is adopted.
Next, we have adoption of the minutes. We have item 7.1, which is the regular City Council meeting minutes from January 17th, 2022, and then the special open Medicine Hat City Council meeting of January 20th, 2022.
Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, the minutes are adopted.
Moving on now to presentations. Our first presentation of the evening is Assessment 101 with Sue Sturkenberg, who's our City Assessor. Item 9.1 in your packets provides background.
Welcome, Sue. You have the floor.
Thank you, Your Worship and councillors. Today, I'd like to provide you with information and fundamentals of assessment. Prior to our March 16th mailing of our assessment notices, this will give you a bit of a foundation of what to expect. And once the notices are mailed, then we'll give you more information as far as the results of the assessment changes. So each year, a three-step process takes place to approve the budget, to determine assessments, and allocate the municipal tax revenue for all parcels in the city. Today we'll concentrate on the step 2, and on the last 5 slides there'll be a brief overview giving you an overview of step 3 taxation. The role of council and the role of the assessor in regards to assessment. When we look at the Municipal Government Act under Part 9 for the assessment of property, which starts about Section 284 of the Municipal Government Act, we see that council can divide assessment classes into Class 1 residential into multiple unlimited number of subclasses. Currently, we have 2 classes for single family and multifamily. Class 2 non-residential it's a bit more limited as far as splitting that class, whether it be into vacant non-residential, small business, or other non-residential. We ask that council direct ratepayers with inquiries to the assessment department if they've got questions about their assessment, and that the assessor is to follow those best practices when preparing the assessment. Municipal Government Act Section 294, after giving reasonable notice, the assessor has the right to enter on, inspect property, and request anything to be produced. The next section, 295, the property owner has the duty to provide the information, and no one may make a complaint in the following year if they've not provided their requested information. So by February 28th, the assessor must prepare the assessment roll, so our staff is busy working on finalizing the assessments, and then we'll be sending out the assessment notices shortly. What is an assessor? Most cities employ their own assessors. Smaller municipalities hire private companies to complete their assessments since the province privatized in 1995. I am the designated assessor appointed for the city, and it's been almost 35 years that I've been doing it, so I love the assessment field. I'm accredited municipal assessor of Alberta with the AMAA designation, and we have 4 other individuals in our office. We've got 14 office staff with the assessment department, and which includes also trainees and 2 part-time admin supports. Ad valorem is a Latin term for according to value. So the ability to pay is determined by the property wealth. The process, the assessor assigns a dollar value to each property for the purpose of property taxation, and that dollar value may be either market value or regulated value. So it's a yearly update to our assessment values, and that ensures a fair distribution of our property tax burden. There are 4 assessment classes that the assessor must assign to each property, and there may be some properties where there are more than one class that's assigned to the property. Class 1 residential has been split by City Council into 2 separate categories, single family and multifamily, being 5 units or more. Non-residential, which are commercial industrial properties, farmland, and machinery and equipment. When assigning the value to a property, the methods to be used are market value regulated. So I'd like to just define each of those. Market value, what is important there is that it is to be sold on the on the open market by willing seller, willing buyer. So the most likely sale price, and that definition comes out of the Municipal Government Act. When we look at the definition of property, it could be either land and improvement or land and improvement. Sometimes there's some confusion with the term improvement, but we take the definition out of the Municipal Government Act, and improvement means a structure, anything attached or secured to a structure. And a lot of individuals might think, well, I haven't done any improvements to my property, why am I getting this notice? But improvement is really defining the structure. A structure definition is a building or other thing erected on or placed in, under, over, or under land, whether or not it's affixed to the land. So that could really mean a lot of different structures that are within the property, not just what you see on the surface. Regulated value, market value is determined by the assessor, and regulated value is determined by the province. And those property types using regulated rates are farmland, railway, machinery equipment, and linear. These types of properties may not transfer in the transfer very often, making that market value standard very difficult. But the province, what we've found is that the province has not updated these regulated rates for several years, thus creating a gap between the regulated value and the market value, so they do not equal one another. Designated industrial properties, since 2018, the province has taken over the responsibility of doing those calculations. That includes linear property, and linear property would include electric power systems, street lighting, telecommunication, pipelines, wells. Railway, and also the province also takes over major plant defining of that value as well. Farmland, using regulated rates. For irrigated farmland, $450 per acre, non-irrigated $350, and then it's multiplied by a production value for that parcel. When we look at farm residence, we do have to split out 3 acres of land must be assessed at market value. If farmland is situated adjacent to servicing, then 3 acres of that land is also assessed at market value at its highest and best use. So as a result, we find significantly lower values with regulated rates than our market value. And when we're looking at farmland, it is a yearly review to make sure that they do meet the farming operation regulations or criteria. Just an example of farmland that is adjacent to servicing. So the first 3 acres zoned as highway commercial has a value of 1.294 million times the mill rate, 24,000, just over 24,000 per year for the taxes. The remaining 24 acres at farmland, the value, assessed value is $3,800 times the mill rate, equaling $72 in taxes. So you can see between the two, there's quite a discrepancy. We've talked about who is the assessor, how we do assessments, what is to be assessed. So not all property is assessable. Some property examples that we do not place a value would be roads, bridges, canals, ditches, water treatment plants, and farm buildings in the rural community. They were 100% not assessed. 5 years ago in 2018 or 2017, they were at 50% taxable. Starting with the year 2018, that began to be phased out. So today in 2022, farm buildings will have a zero assessment. Once we determine that a property is assessable, then we look at whether it's taxable or exempt. Some examples of exempt properties under the MGA, Municipal Government Act, are schools, churches, hospitals, nursing homes, municipally owned properties, or the Crown. A nonprofit organization that does meet the criteria under the Community Organization Property Tax Exemption Regulation will also be exempt, and that is based on an application process which we review every 4 years. Some properties may be accessible but exempt from taxation. So while other properties may be simply non-assessable. So we may have one property, such as some churches that have taxable areas that are used by daycares that we do tax based on the area that they're occupying. What are the standards that are used when assessments are prepared? Our property assessments that are based on market value must be prepared using mass appraisal, and I'll define that in the next slide. The estimate of fee simple, which means the unrestricted ownership, where the owner has complete control of the property. And when we're looking at typical market conditions, typical really means the midpoint or the median. So it may not necessarily be the exact sale price of that property that is transacted. Mass appraisal is the process of preparing assessments for a group of properties using standard methods and common data and allowing for statistical testing. That allows the assessor to accurately value a large number of properties in a short period of time, which can be a challenge in years if we're looking at market value based on sales. If we have a low number of sales, that does become a challenge. We're using 3 years of data to bring all our assessments to a common valuation date. So that lends into the two key legislated dates for assessment processes. The valuation date is based on July 1st of the assessment year. So assessment year is the year prior to taxation year. So for example, 2022 is our taxation year, and our assessment valuation base will be July 1st, 2021. The condition date will be the end of the year, of the assessment year, so December 31st, 2021 for this taxation year. So assessors will review permits at year end for the condition and characteristics of the properties. So anything, so even unfinished construction is assessed. How are assessments prepared? We use 3 approaches when evaluating market value, and I'll explain a little bit of each of one of those. The cost approach, that's a little less than 1% of our properties, about 200 properties, and those that are unique and do not sell often. The sales comparison approach is used for the majority of our properties, residential, so that's about 93% of our properties. The income approach for multifamily, commercial, industrial properties totals about 6% of our properties. The cost approach relates to the value of a property, to the cost of construction. And we do have a costing manual that we use, which is called Marshall and Swift. Under this approach, the assessor will determine the market value for the land and then add in the cost of the building improvements, less depreciation. So as I mentioned, even those properties that are under construction and not fully complete will still be assessed, and the cost approach is a reliable value when looking at new or new improvements. So the next slide is an example of the cost approach. The assessor, this slide here is done by the assessor through our Camelot costing assessment cost system. The first section is the market land details, so based on the size, zoning, location, any new positive factors, negative or positive factors that would be applied to the land for a total of $237,400. Next is the costing from the Marshall and Swift, and just wanted to direct your attention to the description. It's a gas bar with a canopy, booth, pumps, and tanks. So based on that description of structure that I had read earlier, that it could be on or under, in this case, we do assess the pumps and the canopy and the booth that is on the land, and under would be underground tanks for the fueling, fuel storage. The sales comparison approach used for the majority of our properties relates to the sale price of other comparable properties. So when we're looking at properties similar to one another, adjustments will be made to the sale price for comparable properties to bring them more in line with those other properties when being assessed. So this works well for condominium properties as well as residential. For residential, we do a hybrid of both the cost and the sales comparison approach. So we're looking at placing residential properties into models, qualities, and structure types. And it's used by the majority of municipalities in the province, including City of Medicine Hat. So under this approach, all the improvements are first based on the cost approach. We look at grouping these properties together based on age, construction type, size, location, and then adjusting each based on whatever factors are actually physically within that property. So next, this is a sample where the market land valuation based on a 7,000 square foot lot, 155,500, and then next the improvement valuation for a 2,400 square foot house built 2002, and then a garage based on the square footage, same year built for a total. So that just gives a brief summary of the assessment. The next slide will have more of the components within the home: air conditioning, plumbing, cathedral ceiling, decks, basement finish, and any interior finishing within the garage. And the next slide is a sketch of the property. So it's just a brief example of when a property owner comes into the assessment department, we will give them a description of the details, summary of their property, so that they can verify whether the information is correct. The third approach, based on the income approach for our multifamily and non-residential properties, is based on the value of the property reflecting the quality and quantity of the income. So we're not looking at the business income. This is looking at the real estate income only for the building and the land. So each year, the assessor collects the leasing information, and that's done through an assessment request for information, or ARFI, if you've heard that term used before. And that is sent out yearly to the property owner. The assessor places properties of similar groupings based on type, location, age, size, and assigns a market rent. So once they've assigned that market rent to the property, then they use other standardized deductions for vacancy, collection losses, operating cost expenses to create a net operating income. Then we do divide that by the cap rate, which the capitalization rate is calculated by using 3 years of sales. And for the 2022 tax year, July 2018 to June 30th, 2021, is the time frame that we'll be using when we're converting that income into an expression of value. So we do model separately for commercial, industrial, and multifamily properties when we look at those sales separately. An example of an income approach property, you'll see that under the tenant description, there's a basement description of the basement, 1,313 square feet with a rate, and 2 office general on the main floor, one being 5,800 square feet and the other being 5,100 square feet. So that Those total up to the potential gross income less the vacancy allowance. In this case, it is a downtown property office, and when we do the vacancy analysis, we do have our assessors drive by all the inventory each year, so that vacancy is calculated on what is actually happening in our city. It's not based on any other city in the province. So in this case, it's a 15% deduction. The operating cost adjustment for what the property owner would incur to maintain their income stream, less the non-recoverables, being expenses that are also incurred by the property owner, and reserves for replacements, which are also could be termed as structural allowances, typical amount that's set aside for the property capital for replacement. And then finally, the capitalization rate of 7% to calculate the final assessed value of $2,524,500. You also see on the bottom left-hand side that this property has an exempt portion. So part of this property is occupied by a nonprofit or a municipal operation, so that part of this is exempt. Once we prepare the evaluations, before sending them out in the mail, the assessments are all sent to the province, and the province does monitor our assessments to ensure that we meet their quality standards. So that has to be met before we can actually declare our assessments by February 28th. So we're right in that process during this time, finalizing our assessments. The assessment to sales ratio tests are conducted to determine whether assessment values meet regulated or legislated quality standards. So those quality standards are, if we're at 100% of market, we must be within plus or minus 5%. Once our assessments are delivered to the province, plus our sales, and those ratios are determined. There have been a few years where we have not been able to meet the February 28th declaration date, and some of the reasonings for that have been the flood of 2013, a review of non-residential properties, if staff shortage has been a challenge, retirements, or conversion of new assessment systems. So there's been about 4 years that we have then asked the province to provide us with an extension. If you have a property owner that that does not agree with their assessment, what do they do? We ask that you provide them with information to contact the department. Once they contact our department, they can request their assessment summary details. If they have another property that is comparable, we can also provide that information, providing that they have provided the address and a fee. We ask that they dialogue with the assessor, and if they're still not happy with the explanation, they cannot come to an agreement. There is another step. The property owner does have a legal right to appeal their assessment. The Assessment Review Board is an impartial tribunal that hears complaints from the property owner, and the arguments for both sides are written and submitted beforehand to both parties prior to the hearing. So 60 days, the property owner has a chance to review their assessment notice, and it's clearly marked on their assessment notice what that complaint deadline is. There's 2 levels of appeal. The Local Assessment Review Board with 3 dwellings or more, or the Composite Assessment Review Board. So the fee for the LARB, Local Assessment Review Board, is $50, and for all other properties, it's $650. But there is a reduced fee if the property owner files that fee within the first month of receiving their notice. The Assessment Review Board must dismiss a late complaint and must not alter an assessment that has been, that is fair and equitable. They will look at the valuation standards that are set out in the regulations and the legislation, and look at the assessments of similar property within the municipality. If they do not agree with that decision that comes from the Assessment Review Board, the next level is an appeal to the Court of Queen's Bench. A second tax and assessment notice, a supplementary notice, will be sent out during the year for new new construction that is complete or occupied during the year. So since 2006, the City Council has passed a bylaw for supplementary assessments, and this provides additional revenue for the city. It also ensures fair treatment of all new construction to be assessed once complete. An example of a supplementary notice is as if at the end of the year for our condition date, December 31st, the land is vacant, the assessor places an assessment value, we'll say $100,000 in this case, times the single-family tax rate. So that annual bill would have been $942 last year as an example. If new construction is started February 1st and then completed by the end of July, then the supplementary value is set at the full value of the property, $500,000, and then less $100,000 being the annual notice for a supplementary total of $400,000. It's then multiplied by the tax rate and then times the number of months, prorated for 5 months, in this case from August to December. So the supplementary notices are sent in October for all properties that are new construction that are complete or occupied during the year, and prorated. So if you're all still awake after going through assessment basis, you can see that during the assessment cycle there are many factors that the department will go through. So the cycle, we're at the top here, February 28th, that signifies the end of the assessment year. So once that, if we call that the starting point, it's when the assessment notices are mailed out, and there's a 60-day appeal period. Next, the tax notices are mailed out in May, towards the end of May, and due by the end of June. Soon after that, the assessors are already working on the next year valuation and preparing for the supplementary assessment notices that go out. So they'll do annual and supplementary inspections. So they're looking at all new permits, whether it be new construction or demolitions. In September, we're finalizing our sales information. So if we're based on market value, we receive information from Alberta Land Titles to our tax and assessment system. We send out what's called a sales verification form to new owners of property to verify whether or not the transaction was a valid transaction or non-arm's length. And then we're only using those that are valid sales to determine our assessment values. Into the fall, our appeal hearings will occur. Next, we'll work on the land valuation and then finalizing our inspections in December. And then we start with our modeling or doing our market analysis for our property valuation. And next, we'll load that data into Asset, the provincial system, to verify that we've completed our assessments and met the standards. And then we can declare the roll and send out the notices and start all over again. So it's a quick yearly cycle for the assessor. So that kind of gives you just a brief overview of step 2, assessing of properties. Now step 3, as far as council, when they choose to distribute or how they distribute the tax. Taxation is really applying that tax rate or mill rate to the property's assessed value and to determine the amount of taxes payable by the owner. Property taxes being a major revenue source for governments, and the budget that has been approved at $80 million. So you'll see council has a greater role in terms of taxation under Part 10, which starts in the Municipal Government Act, Section 326. Passing a tax rate bylaw, council may cancel, reduce, or refund or defer taxes if they feel it equitable to do so. They also may make bylaws to make exempt property taxable under Section 363, whereas we have the college student dormitories that are taxable. Council may make machinery and equipment exempt from taxation, and as well full or partial exemptions for brownfield properties, so those that are contaminated, underutilized, or underdeveloped as a non-residential property. And the assessor will follow the regulations and legislation, provide the assessment base for setting of those tax rates, and make recommendations for tax rates. If we had one singular tax rate within the city, it would be a simple calculation of taking the 80 million divided by the taxable assessment, if it's 9 billion, to equal the mill rate. However, in this case, Council has in the past decided that that there be different rates for single-family, multifamily, non-residential properties, and farmland. So each of those, the assessor will appoint or put that property within each of the assessment classes, and then City Council will approve the bylaw based on those recommendations for tax rates. The next slide is just an example of our Schedule A for our tax rate bylaw in 2021. The first two sections outline our education requisition, and that is from the province based on our equalized assessments. So in this case, our total education requisition was 24.5 million, and ASFF is the Alberta School Foundation Fund, and then the opt-out school boards, that's the Medicine Hat Catholic School Board. So each of those categories, based on the applicable assessment and the tax levy that is required, will determine the tax rate for the school requisition. The next management body requisition is what has been requisitioned by the Cypress View Foundation, and that's for their outstanding operating costs. So there is a bylaw that has been passed to collect for that additional requisition, and that is shared between Cypress County, Redcliffe, and Medicine Hat based on our equalized assessment. Designated industrial property requisition, that is only sent to those that fall under that DI property type, and that's requisition comes from the province for them to prepare those assessments. And the last section is what our City Council is most interested in as far as what the required applicable assessment is and what the different assessment classes are within each of those categories, whether it be single-family, multifamily, farmland, or non-residential. And in this case, machinery equipment has a zero tax rate, and so zero tax dollars are collected from that. One of the standards from the Municipal Government Act is that the tax ratio between single-family and non-residential be no greater than a 5-to-1 ratio, and currently within Medicine Hat, we have a 2.25 ratio. That provincial education requisition is the amount of taxes that is needed for education. And right now, it's less than 25% of our property tax amount shown on our assessment notice. Who pays this tax? Essentially, all property owners pay the tax, unless they are fully exempt from school. In that case, it's just mostly the provincial properties that will be exempt. So we all pay for the education tax, no matter if our property is residential or non-residential, if we have children in school or not, or if we're a senior citizen. So I hope that's given you a bit of an explanation on assessment, assigning a dollar value to the property, whether based on market value or regulated value, and the difference between the two. Assessing property based on mass appraisal using 3 approaches to the valuation. Then determining whether property is exempt or taxable or non-assessable. The valuation date being important of July 1st of the previous year, and our condition date of December 31st. And then you can really see that taxation is really a separate function from assessment, being that the municipal budget is determined by council. Education requisitions come from the province. Managing body requisitions, that comes currently from the Cypress View Foundation. And a mill rate or a tax rate is a mechanism to really distribute that tax burden evenly or fairly amongst our property owners. I thank you for your time, and if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for, Councillor Dumanowski?
Your Worship, I don't have any specific questions. I do have one. I mean, I've sat through this presentation a number of times. First of all, I want to thank Sue and department for putting the presentation forward. It's a difficult department to work with, not the people, and not to suggest that the public are difficult, but it's a tough one because one thing is for certain, nobody wants to pay taxes, but that burden, that opportunity is there for all of us, and it gives us the opportunities that a community like ours can enjoy after the fact. But I'm not here to sing a song of happiness about assessment, but I do want to recognize that it is a challenge, and one of the equal challenges, and certainly that's why you're here today, is the committee felt it prudent to have you come and speak to the public. There are people who watch council, many of whom are here today, and many in TV land who want to take an interest and can look back at this and make sense of it. It can be confusing and challenging. It's not intended to be so. A couple of things before I get to one small question. One of the things or some of the main things that I think people forget is that assessment is regulated by municipal affairs. So as has been explained numerous times, the rules and regulations, the playbook, if you will, is guided by the province. And we are required to follow those requirements in the end. And one of the challenges that we've faced in the past, and I bring it up because it's important for people to know, is when there's an interest in the public or there's confusion or in one year there were quite a few. We at one point even brought municipal affairs here to this very council, to that podium, to talk to the public, to help them understand the regulations. My main points are around some of the points you brought up, which is, you call it RFI. I've never heard it. RFI is how I've always referred to it, but the request for information is one of the things that, if I were to distill this down to some main things, whether you're a residential, non-residential taxpayer, when you get your RFI or request for information, fill it out, be honest, be fair. In the end, it actually helps you. It doesn't hurt you. One of the biggest misnomers I think I've gleaned in all my time here is this idea of market value. What does that mean? And of course, everybody wants their value to be assessed low when it comes to taxation, but they want their value to be high when it comes to sales, and so they get the most out of it. But it is defined as has been said, willing buyer, willing seller, mass market appraisal, etc. So of all of this, first of all, I just want to recognize the challenges that your department has. I do appreciate you taking the time to equally apprise the people, the public, that there are many, many steps they can take to defend or challenge, whatever you want to call it, their assessment. There's 60-day period, the LARB, the card permit, and that there is the opportunity to, even if they so wish, at some point to take it to the Court of Queen's Bench. So many mechanisms to challenge. I'm happy to hear, and maybe that'll be the first question. My sense is that the number of hearings, I know it can go up and down and it can be based on a number of things, but my sense is that we've, through education, through the opportunities that people have to go directly to your department, directly to people like you, and get the information clarified and unpacked, that we are seeing fewer, is that fair to say, assessment reviews or challenges to the assessment review?
Through the chair. There is a fluctuation in the number of appeals that are filed. I think the highest number that we had back in 2013 was around 150, but we fluctuate around between 30 to 50 appeals each year, so that's around typical.
And how many go out each year?
How many assessment notices? Just over 29,000.
Okay, pretty good ratio. The last thing I wanted to talk about is the ratio of non-residential, residential. I know we typically have had lots of even very specific debates or conversations about that, and certainly we try to model ourselves after ourselves, because it's difficult to compare two communities, but we've been working hard to strike that fair balance. You mentioned a ratio of 5-to-1 is the maximum, I believe you said. So when you say that, 2.25 sounds really good, and it is fair, but do you have any thoughts on where we've trended or where we've trended relative to our peers?
That's information that we bring forward to council for you to observe during the tax rate bylaw. So you'll be seeing that come April. So we'll give the information as far as historically, what have those ratios been at, and how do we fit in relationship to other municipalities within Alberta?
Good answer. Thank you, Sue.
I think that Managing Director Egert had wanted to touch on something that you said.
So through the chair to Councillor Dumanowski, and I am looking at last year's ratio. So as it relates to non-residential tax rates compared to residential, the high point for City Maisonette was back in 2008 when that ratio was 3.16. Since then, we've been seeing a downward trend since that time. Last year was 2.25. So a slight increase from the year before, but I would categorize that as a downward trend from 2008. When we look at municipalities that we compared to last year, and we'll do something similar this year as well, I'll just list them here. Lethbridge, Airdrie, Strathcona County, Wood Buffalo, Red Deer, Grand Prairie. So that'll give you a flavor of the type of municipalities that we compare. Everyone has their own story, and everyone has their own mix of residential and non-residential, and what really drives that community. So that needs to be taken into account when we compare communities to each other. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Van Dyke?
Yes, thank you. Councillor Dumanowski asked part of my question, which was how many assessment appeals we typically have in a year. But further to that, is there kind of a trend? Are they based on similar reasons, or is it just kind of all over for the reasons for the appeals?
Through the chair. Normally, we have a lower number of residential properties under appeal, anywhere 3 to 5. The non-residential multifamily, it could be for varying reasons. When I had talked about the income approach, 6% of our properties are based on the income approach for non-residential multifamily. However, they make up 40% of our revenue. And so that's what's at risk for appeal are the income approach properties. And when those are based on the RFI or the assessment request for information that goes out, would appreciate council's support to have property owners fill out that request for information so that we can get the most accurate values and numbers so that we can be able to justify and support those assessments before an appeal board, because that's what's going to help us and provide us with the most accurate assessment. Currently, our return for our fee is between 58 to 62% return.
Councillor Canodal?
Through the chair, thanks. So I have a couple different questions, and if you don't mind, we'll just ask them back and forth. So the first one is, and thank you for being here, Sue. It's awesome to have you. Your knowledge is appreciated. What is the most common issue or misunderstanding about assessment that you hear from the community?
That is a good question. I think most property owners want to make sure that we have the correct information on their assessment. So common misunderstanding, a lot of property owners will say, well, my basement's not finished, so you can't assess my basement. If there's maybe 1 or 2 baseboards that are missing. So a lot of times it will be information and education that we would like to provide to the property owner to say, what is the value of your property? How would that sell in the marketplace? So we do want to provide the best and most accurate information for the property owner, and the assessors love to have that time just to sit down with the property owner, whether it be over the phone, at the counter, or at their property, just to go over the details to make sure that we have it correct. And the most accurate way to do that is to have that dialogue with the individual. And as I said, the property, or the assessor does have the ability to enter into and inspect property, and that way they can have the most accurate record of what inventory is on that property.
Thank you. Is community housing exempt from this collection, just the same as dorms at the college?
The dorms at the college are taxable, as well as the community housing. So both are assessable and taxable.
Two more. How frequently does the provincial government change the percentage required to pay to education?
Through the chair, the education requisition is a yearly requisition based on our equalize. So that's based on our previous year's assessment. And with that ratio, it's a calculation that they use. When we have to be at 100% of market value, if our ratio is at 98%, they'll apply that to our assessment base against every municipality, depending on what their ratio is, to bring them all to 100%. And then based on whatever their budget is for the education, divided by the equalized assessment, that's what the value requisition will be for each municipality. So that is done on a yearly basis. So that can fluctuate. Some years we've seen 4% increase in education requisition, or it could be anywhere from 2 to 4% or more. And that's going to depend on what happens with our assessment base and our ratios as well. So there's a lot of different factors that can influence that.
I think I'll be done. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Councillor Robbins?
Through the chair, hi Sue. My questions are much like Councillor Canota's, they're more curiosity. I think your presentation was very informative and thorough, so I understand it as much as I can without further training in being an assessor, which is maybe not the career for me. But my first question is about assessors. Are all of the assessors in the department cross-trained to do this income assessment or market modified, or do you specialize in them?
Through the chair, in a smaller municipality, we have the ability to be able to do more cross-training, but it does take time to train the assessors. So our new assessors coming in predominantly will begin with residential properties, with the philosophy that's sometimes an easier place to start, evaluating properties, and then once they progress, they will do assessments of other properties. So when we have a staff of 12 assessors, and if we've got, in the past we've had numerous retirements because we had a staff that had been here for several years. So the cross-training is beneficial for the stability of the department and to make sure that we can have our succession planning so that we can provide that education and have more stability with our assessments.
Great, thank you. And I have a question about page 43 of your slides. Maybe it's not labeled that way for you. Sorry, it would be a different slide number. It doesn't matter. Asset specifically. And you had mentioned that if it's not within 5%, so this is the quality control of municipal affairs, right? So if it's not within 5% one way or the other, then you're not meeting the quality control requirement. Is there a consequence to that, is my question.
We just can't declare. So what we have to do is we go back, we work through our assessments to make sure that our assessments are meeting that value. So that's where in some years you may find that some assessments are increasing more than others, and that's in order to meet that ratio. If we've got sales that are higher and our assessments are too low, we need to move up our assessment value so that the gap is not too great. So we have to be within that 5% to meet our those standards.
And if you're not, you get more homework from Municipal Affairs, is what I'm understanding.
That is correct. So
Okay.
we'll go through the first audit, and then they will do a more detailed audit after we declare, and if there's issues, they will have us fix that for the next year.
And you mentioned something very early on which really piqued my interest. You talked about section 294, I believe, allowing an assessor the ability to access a home to inspect or to make the assessment, like physically make the assessment. So my question is, how often is that necessary? And did COVID affect the way that process happened?
Through the chair. Yes, it did affect. We do have, if we're looking at residential properties, and our aim is to look at 1/5 of our properties every 5 years, so 20% of our properties every 5 years. If we're looking at certain neighborhoods, in order to get the most accurate information would be to have an interior inspection. If we're not able to do that with property owners, we do send out surveys for them to have a hand in responding and providing the information. And the assessors will also drive by, could be information through MLS and sorry, what was the other part to that?
I just wondered how often that happened, and if COVID affected whether that took place for the last 2 years.
Thank you. I apologize. Yeah, so we did provide property owners during COVID with other options. If they were not comfortable with an assessor in the home, that was no problem. They could do an interview at the door or over the phone. They could also provide pictures and videos through email. So we really did want to provide options for property owners so that we could still get the accurate information.
Councillor Hirsch?
Thanks, Your Worship. Sue, I didn't see you on the last go-around on corporate, but I've been through a lot of your presentations before as well, so thank you for that. And, you know, on my travels, I talked to many different people, and some business owners, quite frankly, that when we talk inevitably, well, back up a second, you talk about COVID, so they're looking at every line item in their budget. And inevitably, it comes back to a discussion that there's a feeling within the business community that they subsidize residential rates. And when I got elected, it was whatever the ratio was at, I just tried to work towards reduction, and we've had this conversation before. But going back a little bit, and maybe you can help, and maybe you might be able to, you might plead the fifth in terms of how the originations of the discrepancy occurred, but I mean, I think there's a noticeable attempt for us to drive it down. But was there, or, you know, and I know we compare ourselves to other municipalities, but I'm just intrigued by the fact that there is a difference in that. And maybe it might be because the population of the businesses are by volume are way smaller than the larger. But just maybe some feedback on that, because I just feel inadequate when I get that charge leveled at me. And all I can say is I'm trying to do my best to lower it. But, you know, it was always a bugaboo for me in terms of how that originated.
Through the chair. So just to clarify, you're looking for more information on the ratio between non-residential and single family, and why the difference of, say, back in 2008, it was at a higher level?
Well, that or the discrepancy in general. I know we had a previous councillor here that would all try to drive the idea of a one-to-one and to get there. But being a zero-sum game, that equates to residential having a massive potentially increase to their taxes to counteract. But I guess I'm just wondering if there's the originations, if there was some discussion in terms of how we got there. It is prevalent without the community. Within every community, we see where we rank, and I appreciate that, because of course, it's almost every year we get the inevitable conversation with the Chamber of Commerce talking about that ratio as well. And I think, you know, I'm pretty pleased of the progress that we made, but just some indication of, and it might have predated you, just some historical stuff to just respond to a business owner that charges that at me.
Through the chair. What I can do is provide you with information on assessment, and then council will have to make that decision as far as what that ratio will be. But my observations with ratios that were higher in the past is when our assessments were lower, say for non-residential prior to 2013. If our assessments were lower, then that's when that gap was higher, that tax ratio, because then the tax rate was at a higher level in order to meet that, whatever tax revenue you want to generate from non-residential. It's going to be for different reasons. If we look at Calgary, their ratio was up to 4 to 1 in the past years, and that's been coming down, but then the burden shifts to the residential property owners. So it's going to be for different reasons for different property municipalities, depending on their mix of non-residential and residential and what their market values are doing.
That's a good answer, thank you.
I think Acting City Manager Mastel has something to add as well.
Thanks, Your Worship. Through the chair to Councillor Hirsch. There was a pretty in-depth examination conducted in the last 2 years that I think we could refresh and bring back as part of the tax rate setting discussion, just to give a little bit more insight on that particular question. The one thing that I recall that we learned as we looked at peer groups and examined it is it very much does reflect each municipality's unique circumstances. So within the $8 billion of assessment base in the city of Medicine Hat, that composition looks quite different here than it does in a number of peer municipalities, and so that gives rise to different ratios like that. So it's an indicator, but where it landed with the previous council was it didn't find its way into a policy position that would say this would be the right rate. It needs to be looked at each year in the tax rate setting methodology, the exercise, and as part of that, Managing Director Eggert said that there will be a peer comparison available for council to look at and see what's happening in other municipalities, but we can also describe the factors of consideration that we uncovered as we went through that exercise as well. So that might be a good undertaking for us to bring back in a couple months' time.
So in just supplemental and maybe in support or defense or otherwise, I, in my travels, had conversations with the town of Chestermere, for example, a bedroom community of Calgary, and their industry/business was really low because for the most part, it was more residential. So they're begging for more business to come to town to be able to kind of share that wealth. So, you know, I guess my point is I appreciate the fact that we kind of look at other municipalities, but that is kind of almost a little bit orange apple. It's still a fruit, I get it, but, you know, you don't know the composition of that municipality in terms of the number of businesses relative to residents, et cetera. And again, I appreciate the fact that, you know, again, I want to reiterate that it was a movement of this council and previous councils, and I can't speak for this one because haven't got our strategic plan put together yet, but it was a goal to have that ratio lowered a little bit. So I like the trajectory we're on. So thank you.
All right, seeing no more questions, thank you so much, Sue. That was wonderful.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I'll be speaking to you again here once we send out the notices, just to give you an idea what the results were going from last year to this year.
Thank you, appreciate that. Can I get a motion to accept the presentation for information?
So moved.
And Councillor Knodel seconds? Okay. And we'll vote. It's unanimous. Thank you.
Our next presentation tonight is Strategic Planning, Environmental Stewardship. Kevin Redden, who's our Director of Environment, Land and Government Relations, will be speaking on this subject, and there's some more background information in item 9.9 of your packets.
Welcome, Director Redden. You have the floor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. I come before you tonight to seek direction regarding commencement of environmental stewardship strategic planning as initial steps in building an environmental framework for the City of Medicine Hat. We know that the city has considered its environmental responsibility in initiatives such as HatSmart, the 2018 Drought Management Plan, Emergency Response Planning, and has indicated environmental stewardship commitments and aspirations in the MyMH Master Plan and the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, but we really lack a cohesive document to guide environmental decision-making. That doesn't seem to be advancing my slide. It is. Pardon me. So why an environmental framework? We want to build off successes and address the gaps. We want to develop a cohesive overarching strategy and provide guidance on integrating wise resource management into city programs and policies with greater depth and intention. Along with informing new policies, the framework must be designed to both extend and reflect existing strategies. We want to reduce risk and plan for change, reduce the city's vulnerability to future environmental changes in the face of increasing climate uncertainty. We could further increase preparedness for extreme weather events, enhance social resilience for vulnerable populations, and diversify energy assets in anticipation of federal and provincial directives. We could harness economic opportunities by demonstrating a commitment to the environment to help attract business, employees, and other new residents, stimulating growth in the local economy and contributing positively to quality of life. We know that many companies are increasing their environmental commitments, and their investors require a business environment supportive of their ESG targets, and there's also a green jobs initiative that we could take advantage of. Increasing community vibrancy, provide direction to incorporate specific strategies and actions into area redevelopment plans and city policies guided by the MyMH Master Plan, and foster systemic environmental and other stakeholder engagement. We can enhance the opportunity to attract and retain a younger workforce, demonstrate a commitment to conservation of our natural areas and viewscapes. Also could consider improving operations. This could include improving the energy performance of city buildings, explore opportunities for more efficient demand-side opportunities, strengthen resilience to disruptions in the electrical grid with supplementing with renewables, and create efficiencies, additional efficiencies in the city fleet through alternative fuel strategies. And of course, we all know there's a myriad of funding opportunities being offered out there for green initiatives, both federally and provincially. An environmental strategy would really help us focus those efforts and determine which ones we want to go after. This is how the environmental framework would fit in the existing hierarchy of plans. We know that you're still undertaking strategic planning. And the MyMH Master Plan informs all documents. The scope and ambition of the framework would be defined as part of this process. And the intent is to go beyond compliance and above what we do today. And of course, there'll be resourcing fundings that have to be considered in that. City Council Strategic Plan and the Municipal Development Plan are key documents that inform all city actions. By keeping these policies in mind, the framework can act as an umbrella strategy that pulls together all of the city's environmental initiatives, ensures they are aligned with one another, along with the MDP and Council's vision and strategic priorities. And there are a number of the other considerations that could be given under environmental framework. Structure and key components. As I said, the vision will be established by Council. along with the principles and the priority areas to address. The vision is really a declaration of the city's environmental ambitions for the future and creating the environmental identity of the city. Principles identify the key issues that a framework should address and will tie into council's strategic priorities. And the vision and principles could be established through an iterative process with council, administration, and staff. The goals and targets, once vision and principles are established, the framework should identify expected achievements over the short and long term. And goals and targets are meant to be established in comparison to leading municipalities and peers, staff expertise, and input by stakeholders. Setting goals and targets is necessary to ensure transparency, consistency, and accountability. Strategies and actions are the delivery mechanisms. Strategies could range from public education and awareness to the development of policies, plans, and incentive programs. Benefits of this approach is to establish long-term consistency and accountability in budgeting, provide staff with greater clarity, and make the city's actions more transparent to stakeholders. Based on initial scoping that we've done within my department, the following proposed key action areas have been identified. Those are land use and biodiversity, renewable energy, energy conservation, water security, and waste and recycling. In our next steps, should council approve of commencement of environmental strategic planning toward formalizing an environmental framework, the following next steps would be proposed. Much of this could be done internally with my staff, information gathering and context development. We'd be looking at urban environmental impacts and benefits research. We'd have to do a regulatory and policy review, peer scan, stakeholder identification, and again, we could target that in Q1 once we understand strategic priorities. In parallel to establishment of those visions and principles that will come out of strategic planning. Next step would be to do a materiality assessment, understanding our current state, gap analysis and needs assessment. Again, we'd target Q2, Q3 of this year with internal resources to get that done. And then establish vision and key issues to be addressed in the framework. So what we're proposing is develop a strategic plan forming the basis of the framework, identifying the key issues that must be addressed through strategies and actions of an environmental framework. And we, again, would do this with internal resources and have that together by year end 2022. Obviously, resourcing and funds will be required for creation of a framework, so there'll be budgetary considerations for implementation of a beyond compliance vision for the next budget planning process. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Redden. I'll open it up for questions, but I first just want to ask a question about the process here. So I'm not seeing a briefing note in the open agenda, and I note that in item 9.2, this item is labeled for information. So my understanding, and I think you said you're asking for direction to proceed, so I think we will have to make a motion to that effect in light of it not being in 9.9. Okay, hold on. I was looking at 9.2. My bad. Got it. Thank you. Councillor Knodel?
Thanks, Mayor Clark. Through the chair, thank you for your presentation. I'm excited to see that we're headed in this direction. I think the one thing that I wrote down here is that the people that we're hearing from through the campaign, the people that chose the new group of us, are the ones who want to see this. That's my belief. That's what I've heard. And this, over anything else, is reason enough for me to support the master plan. I am in support of parallel development alongside our strategic planning. And I think that seeing HatSmart being utilized in the way that it is, and you know, like first-time home buyers, I was one a couple years ago. I have friends that are first-time home buyers within the last 5 years, telling me about the thermostat that they got at that time for free, paid for free through HatSmart. I know that people care about this, and it will be, I think that that's just a small scale symbol of what it could become. And we have, you know, we're in, and Councillor Van Dyke is an expert on this. I know, you know, she talks about, we are in a semi-arid desert environment. To use our resources wisely, especially as we move forward into the environment that we are headed into. Water conservation is essential. I always imagine our community with zero-scaped front lawns. Like, I would love to see more prairie grasses in front lawns. I think that would just be so cool. So I really look forward to this, and I think it could change not only the political direction, the way that we gather funding, but also the physical environment that we see our community as. And I think there's some innovation there that I'm excited about. So thank you.
Councillor Dumanowski?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Being on the council that wasn't one of the new ones, I can appreciate the comments that Councillor Knoll was making, and certainly I don't want to, and she's not suggesting, and I'm not admitting that the council prior to this abdicated their responsibility to create a roadmap. I know we've been proudly supporting the likes of HatSmart as one of those pieces, but it is one piece of a bigger picture. And for me, I had a couple of questions, and then a parting question we're going to ask in reverse is, whatever path we go down and whatever the pillars are of this plan, how do we ensure, and it's not because I'm skeptical or I'm not behind it, I'm the opposite, I'm completely ready to move down this path. What I think a lot of people will ask, and no different than what they see on a national and international level, is, and it's sometimes hard not to get a little bit cynical around the reliability, the relevance of those plans. How realistic are they? And if they're not a true roadmap in the broad sense or very myopic sense, then it's nothing more than an exercise of politics and trying to spearhead in a direction but not really move anywhere. And so I guess I'm asking is, how will we know as the stewards of that document in the end, by affirming it, how will we know that we have developed a plan that is relevant, is realistic, and that has targets or measurables that can be achievable? And I don't mean all of them, and I don't mean they're not moving targets, but in the broad sense. Otherwise, it's just another exercise that in frustration for a lot of people, not the least of which this council and future ones.
Through the chair. I think where we've seen a lack of success in the past is when targets and objectives were set that were beyond the city's control, that you set public targets and you're expecting buy-in. If you don't get that buy-in, you can fail. What we've seen from some of our initial peer scan is realistic objectives and targets being set around consumption of potable water, for example, emissions from city-owned facilities, those types of targets that you can really put within the city's control. And of course, there's a number of strategies and actions that this would all play a part of, but I think it's setting those individual targets that we really can control our destiny over.
Just supplementary then, thank you. I have some thoughts on that, but I'm going to hold them for another day. Can you just elaborate the peer scan and stakeholder identification? Just speak to that. Who is that audience? Peer suggests a lot to me, but how do we know that the stakeholders whom we engage, some of them are going to be straightforward and logical, but some of them may not, and it might be the average citizenry, quite frankly, that ought to be the biggest stakeholder in this grouping. How will you go about identifying those stakeholders and doing that peer scan? Can you just speak to that a bit, please?
Through the chair. I think our peer scan will be based on municipalities of similar size, is what we've looked at previously. Other cities, both within Alberta and some in Saskatchewan, some with similar landscapes, river communities, for example. We've looked at some of the targets and objectives that they've set. That's been very rudimentary to this point, so we would dig into those deeper. And I think in terms of identifying stakeholders, we've had a surprising proactive response since this department was created, and a number of environmental interest groups have stepped up and expressed voicing some concerns and some willingness to contribute, as have a number of internal departments looking for that guidance and being able to set targets and objectives within their own departments. So I think we've seen through the Parks Master Plan that stakeholder engagement was indeed members of the community, and you, in that process, you have to filter what's relevant to the process and the document you're trying to create.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Van Dyke?
Thank you. Not questions so much as comments, but definitely feeling like this is a plan that's, time has come for the city. And I know that I heard a lot from community members about this. We've heard from staff and employees internally that this is important to them. And like you said, through the Parks and Rec Master Plan, that was a key part of the stakeholder engagement, that people were concerned about the environment. And we, you know, currently we're one of the few municipalities that doesn't already have an environmental framework or a climate change strategy. And so we're really putting ourselves at a disadvantage with industry and business as well, who are looking to green their business. But of course, as Councillor Knodel said, we have unique climate here, semi-arid desert. And I know I talk about drought all the time, but I wouldn't be the daughter of a dryland farmer if I didn't. And the concerns that come along with that in our community. And I think that developing you know, a really strong environmental framework or an environmental lens that we look through at all of our decision making is really going to set us apart, identify us as a sustainable community. And I'm very excited about the work and very confident in the staff and administration in the creation of a robust and attainable plan. So thank you very much.
Councillor McGrogan?
Through the chair to Director Redden, thanks so much for the presentation. It was excellent. I just want to say I really, kind of this whole thing is obviously meant to be a framework, and it's, I know the average citizen will be saying, well, how does that affect me? How does that affect, you know, the thing that's important to me, the car I want to plug into my garage, and or whatever it is. And I just want to say the slide on the environmental framework within the hierarchy of the plans, I think it's beautifully kind of positioned there, because you got the strat plan, you have the master plan, and then everything we do from there, we're considering the environmental impacts. And so anyway, I just want to compliment that. I think it's really, it's nicely positioned and easy for people to see and go, okay, I kind of get that, you know, all the decisions we make, one of the things we're going to consider is our environmental framework, because as Councillor Knodel said, it was a big issue on our door-to-doors and our campaigning, whatever we did, and just a thank you.
Thank you, Director Redden. Very good presentation, and really looking forward to see what comes out of this. I do want to encourage, even though I agree it has to be something we can deliver on, and we want to make sure that we're reviewing it regularly to make those tweaks that are necessary. At the same time, I do want to encourage you to be visionary in terms of maybe it's going to take us a longer time to get places, but really have I know that our staff can have a real visionary approach to this, and you know, it's okay sometimes to shoot for the moon, and we can adjust if things are not going as planned. I wanted, if you can, comment on the added importance of having an environmental strategy, an environmental framework in the context of being an energy producer and distributor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think we've seen that, that we do have to adapt for the future in our energy production business. We've seen where NGPR is taking us, and now we've, of course, with our power plant and natural gas powered resources, we do want to start thinking about initiatives, alternative fuel initiatives, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. I think that's one of those strategies that fits under the master plan, a renewable energy strategy, and the next step for the city's energy division.
Councillor Hyder?
Thank you, Your Worship, through the chair. Thank you, Director Redden. That was really informative for myself. I love the idea of planning for the future, and I'm going to echo Councillor Van Dyke, who she and I rarely echo each other, but tonight I will. Having the environmental framework is crucial for our community. I love the idea of the grant opportunities that lay ahead for the Green Initiative plans. It's crucial for us to have that. And I do love the talk of adapting to different industries coming here and being able to be adaptable for them, and just having that fluid conversation of different opportunities for our community. So thank you.
Councillor Knodel?
Thanks, Mayor Clerk. Real quick, I think what we'll see in a community, I guess, perspective is consumers today look to action items like this one or frameworks like this one to see the values of a community. And I think we will also, there will be a bit of this is like a green light for a lot of environment-focused people. If they know that the community values the environment, they're naturally going to want to head in that direction. The way that people spend money these days is very much purpose-focused, environment-focused, convenience-focused, of course. But I see that as this would be a green light for a lot of those people to potentially relocate here as well, which is awesome.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, I want to apologize again for my confusion about the briefing note. I hope I didn't cause you too much concern about that. It is at 9.9, and so we will be dealing with that later on in the agenda, but thank you so much. And can I get a motion to accept the presentation for information? Councillor Van Dyke and Councillor McGrogan. We will vote. And that's unanimous. Thank you again.
Moving on to reports now. Item 9.1 is the Corporate Services Committee meeting of January the 13th, and this is just for information.
So moved.
Second.
I'll second.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, we will vote. And that's passed unanimously.
Our next report's item 9.2, Energy and Infrastructure Committee meeting of January 20th, again for information.
I'll motion.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Councillor Hirsch.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just a question, either for staff or maybe acting city manager, and you might defer if you want to, that's fine. So I'd kind of thought about this the other day, last time we had council, I might have brought it up, and the fact that I treasure HatSmart. It was innovative at the time when it first started, and it continues to be an envy of a lot of municipalities. But I guess I'm just wondering, is there any deliberation by staff to start thinking about the mechanics of how we get that funded? And the only reason I'm asking is, and I brought it up the other day, and I don't know if there was any traction on this, and the fact that you've got people in the community that are now environmentally conscious, they're plugging in their vehicles in their home, and then as a result, becoming penalized, if you will, for being energy hoggers, but in fact, they're actually doing their part for the environment. And so it feels a little counterintuitive to me, because I know at the start, the whole intention was that when you hit a certain strata, then that kicks in. But inevitably, you're gonna have people that do plug in their vehicles. I would just imagine for sure that would be well past, and they're in that territory where they're continuously paying. But again, now it was, I mean, understand that phenomenon wasn't there even 5 years ago, wasn't there 7 years ago, and certainly wasn't there at the start of HatSmart. So long story short, is there any discussion in terms of the funding mechanism or any type of discussion on that going forward?
Just maybe to add to that, if you wouldn't mind, maybe you're deferring it, but maybe just to elaborate a little bit about that fee or the program that Councillor Hirsch is talking about for the benefit of council.
Your Worship, if I could defer it, I think Managing Director Pancoast would probably be best equipped to respond to the questions. Thanks.
Thank you, through the chair. With respect to the question regarding HatSmart and the funding mechanism, we absolutely are mindful and appreciate you raising that a couple of councils ago. At the moment, the significance level is pretty small. We haven't had any direct questions or concerns about that. However, we're always mindful of making sure that we're looking to incent the right behavior, and certainly EV transition is one of those behaviors we would be looking to incent or at least not penalize. So it is something that we are mindful of, and particularly as part of our broader environmental framework, and also anticipating a broader energy strategy as we think about decarbonization and making sure that we are mindful of where disruptive technologies like electric vehicles and even other demand-side management sorts of initiatives go. So we haven't looked at it yet, but it is absolutely on our radar to look at it in more detail, because we want to make sure that incentives are aligned for the right behaviors.
It's a really good point. Seeing no more questions, can I get a motion? Oh, sorry, we'll vote. And that's unanimous.
Item 9.3 is the Emergency Advisory Committee meeting of January 21st, 2022, and just for information.
I'll move the acceptance of the report.
And Councillor Van Dyke seconds. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, we will vote. And that's passed unanimously.
Our next report's item 9.4, Public Services Committee meeting January 24th, 22, and again for information.
I'll move the acceptance of that report.
I'll second.
Any questions or comments? Councillor Hirsch?
Thanks, Your Worship. Maybe through the chair to the chair or to maybe staff. I'm intrigued on the e-scooter pilot, and knowing that this is something new for the residents in the city. And I know we're not an implementation road, but the fact that this is being considered in the face of skateboarders that came to us saying about skateboarding down sidewalks, et cetera, which we never, the city actually, through bylaw, didn't allow. So, and I know it was written a little bit in the decision item talking about it. So I just maybe want a summary of where we're at. Are we considering best practices from, I think it was the city of Calgary and other municipalities have had this in the past, and just make sure we're eyes wide open if we're treading down this road or scooting down this road, as the case may be.
Councillor Robbins, do you want to take a crack at that, or do you want to defer to acting city manager?
I want to take a crack at it through the chair, but I'm going to let Acting Manager Mestel do it because he has more recent information than I have, I believe.
Thank you, through the chair, to Councillor Hirsch. Thanks for the question. Yes, certainly an initiative and opportunity that we're quite excited about. Still in exploration stages for sure, but are trying to advance towards a spring launch of the pilot. The expectation at this stage would be that the e-scooters would not be permitted to be on sidewalks, so in a similar fashion as the restrictions for use of skateboards. But that is an area that was identified to be considered, and recognition that we do have an active bylaw in place, Bylaw 3506, related to skateboard use, and making sure that we are consistent in our approach. So in the event that we were looking to permit e-scooters somewhere that skateboards are not permitted, we should be making sure that both modes of transportation would be permitted. So thanks for raising that. More to follow for sure, and I look forward to bringing further updates to council on this.
Thank you. Councillor Robbins.
Yes, thank you through the chair. And Councillor Hirsch, I didn't want our skateboarder friends, because I know you and I have many of them, because we love skateboarding together or something. But I did hear from skateboarders through the campaign about the skateboard bylaw, and I just want to point out that that remains on the outstanding list of public services with the Q2 2022 review. So what we've been discussing is reviewing other peer municipalities and what their bylaws are and where we can make changes. So we haven't forgotten the skateboarders in favor of the scooters.
Thank you. Councillor Dumanowski.
Thank you, Worship. I have no puns to offer today. Just a straightforward conversation about item number 2, believe it or not, public art. I sat on, back in the day, our Arts and Heritage Advisory Board, and part of that was a public art committee, and it was made up of very spirited members of this community, very diverse backgrounds. Some of them artists themselves, some just curators are interested in it. But in my time there, I know we had a lot of spirited conversation around public art funds and the allocations, and historically them being tied to new capital projects. So I believe I'm understanding this to be basically an untethering, or at least an exploration of that, so that it's no longer necessarily tethered to a capital project, but as it says here, flexibility to invest in public art that is not necessarily directly tied to a project that gave rise to the funding. So a percentage of the project. So I guess my question in totality is, what is envisaged here? I support that. I think it makes sense, especially in years or when we're not necessarily identifying new projects all the time, and we shouldn't have to hurry to do that in order to get more public art. I do actually have a strong appreciation for that world, and so I'm heartened to see this. I guess I just want to understand that statement a little better, so I'm not sure who's positioned to answer that.
Through the chair to Councillor Dumanowski. Yes, so that statement was given an indication of what we think is an opportunity, and through some of the initial research and feedback that we've heard, it would suggest creating greater latitude to invest the funds that are related and funded through capital work. So the undertaking of the capital work currently brings forth a budget of 1.25% of the capital budget for the use of public art, but it has commonly been attached specifically to the project, the capital project itself. And so the flexibility to invest in public art in an area that may not necessarily be the same as where the capital project is occurring is an area that we are signaling that we would be incorporating into a proposed bylaw change. So there's a public art, it's a public art policy, sorry, not a bylaw, that will be coming forward later this year. but it also relates to these particular projects and the funds that would give rise to public art would not necessarily be attached to the projects themselves. So that's why it was noted at this particular time that we would look for a budget amendment related to the, or a budget related to the stimulus projects for public art, but they wouldn't necessarily see the public art installed at the area. So at the athletic park, for example, or at the pickleball facility at Big Marble Go Center. So we may have public art attached to it by the funding trigger, but you wouldn't necessarily see the public art installed at site there. So that's what was intended when we were describing this to committee.
Awesome. Support that. Thank you.
Councillor Knodel?
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Through the chair, I'm just going to go back to the scooter conversation, if that is all right. So I have a couple of concerns, and I think acting city manager Mastel would probably be the best person to answer them, but I'll just put them out there and then a response can be made. So my main concern with scooters, and I'm a supporter, by the way, I'm a scooter supporter, but I have a concern about the safety of not on sidewalk skateboarding, scootering, bicycling in a community that highly values driving their cars from their house to work and back to their house. So we have room in my eyes for increasing the safety of traveling on non-motorized devices, whether they're scooters, e-scooters, or anything else. And I would like to see, as we move forward, some thoughts about how, whether it's, you know, reducing the speed on certain roads that these devices are used on, or adding spaces on the side of the road that they can be driven on. I think that I watch bicyclists, even skateboarders in the community often get passed by vehicles quite quickly, and I worry about the safety of the people that are actually legally sharing the road with often, you know, bigger vehicles and vehicles that could cause them bodily harm. So I think that as we move forward with this one, I would like to see an asterisk beside safety and making sure that we are consulting user groups and making sure that the people who are using these devices are kept safe.
So I'm going to give Acting City Manager Mastel an opportunity to address that, but it also is relevant to something that came up in energy and infrastructure. So maybe Councillor Van Dyke after Acting City Manager Mastel. Yeah.
Thanks, Your Worship. Through the chair, so a couple comments. Certainly safety is a consideration. One of the features of the e-scooters is an ability to limit where they are used by geofencing the area. So that is to be established as we work towards this pilot. So in conversations with the provider and our own view of what the safety considerations might be, we may choose to geofence the availability of e-scooters in particular areas of the city. If I think about the downtown core area, the speed limit has already been reduced in the downtown area to recognize the fact that there is a lot of pedestrian traffic, a number of vehicular movements coming in and out of parking and things of that nature, and the addition of something like e-scooters within the mix of that would be a consideration. I did hear some of the safety aspects in terms of road configuration at energy and infrastructure, and the width of the road and the way that we set up the intersections and the way that we have bulb outs for the crosswalks and things of that nature are part of the design to assist with the safety and the traffic calming in that area. So some of those measures are in place to assist with safety in the downtown area that may not be available on some of our arterial roads. So we will be mindful of where we think safe use of these e-scooters can occur and look to limit the use in the city as we introduce them. So thanks for raising it for sure.
Counselor Van Dyke,
Do you mind if I follow up super quick to Managing Director Maspel? It'll just be a quick
Yep,
comment.
sure.
As an addition to safety, making sure that traveling not by car is also useful, because we have a beautiful trail system, but sometimes we can't get to where we need to go quickly or easily on those trails if it's for intentional travel. So just that thought as well. Thank you.
Counselor Van Dyke?
You've brought up so many excellent points. Thank you, Councillor Knodel. Sorry, through the chair. So last week at Energy and Infrastructure, we hosted a presentation by Bike Medicine Hat, which will be coming to Open Council at some point in the future. I'm not sure of the exact timing, where they specifically talked about Vision Zero, which is traffic safety, talked a lot about the traffic calming things you're talking about, and also in the Parks and Rec special meeting, I'm not sure if that's what it's called, it was also discussed about the fact that we have amazing recreational trails in the city, but they're not very practical if you're actually wanting to use a bicycle to run errands, for example. And so integrating recreational bike trails with a cycle track system that you can use so that you're not dependent on vehicles for travel, so that multimodal transportation. So there is information has been fanned out to the relevant divisions, and there are the traffic, I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact name. They are looking at active transportation coordination around this as well. So there will be more coming forward.
Seeing no further questions, we'll vote on the motion. And that's passed.
Our next report's item 9.5, the Corporate Services Committee meeting of January 27th. Again, for information.
So moved.
Second.
Counselor Van Dyke?
Yes, thank you. I had a question, and I'm not sure who it would be directed to, around the principles. So there are, sorry, I had actually the slide up here and then I've lost it. It talks about the principles under the bylaw for, sorry. And I noticed that they're all excellent principles, but I wondered if there is one regarding, oh, here we go, Investment Policy 0167, agenda page number 163. I wondered if there's any policy or principles around ethical investment.
Your Worship, I'll maybe refer that to Managing Director Eggert.
So through the chair, thank you for that question. And we have been going through quite a few investment manager selections over the last year. And that's both identifying them, interviewing them, selecting them, and then engaging them. All of them have been assessed on the ESG standard. Various investment managers are at different stages in terms of how sophisticated they are with ESG, but nevertheless, it is essentially something that in the universe that we're looking for the investment managers, all of them will have ESG standards. And so that for us was a criteria for selection.
Seeing no further questions, we'll vote on the motion. Oh, your mic's on.
Thank you. Oh, is it okay?
Counselor Knodel, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I was hitting the wrong button. Through the chair, I just had a quick question in regards to the investment review panel, likely for Managing Director Eggert. We rely on two people outside of our community, one from Calgary, one from Edmonton, if I'm not mistaken. How do we determine who those human beings are and what are their roles?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. You're referring to the investment review panel. That investment review panel has been in existence for the last 6 years. ever since the city moved to the Major Cities Investment Regulation through the province, which allows us to expand the type of investments that the city invests in. This particular investment review panel is a group to support the Managing Director of Corporate Services, so myself. They are made up of 3 external members, plus internal members as well. They are serving, each of the external members will serve a 3-year term and can serve up to 2 of them. And if there's any exception to that, that would be acknowledged and approved. We're currently approaching the 6 years, so we have some change that will need to be coordinated. This has been a valuable committee. We don't use the word committee because it's not a committee, but it's a valuable group for me and the Treasury group in terms of the journey that we went through to create a strategic asset allocation plan. I'll give you a flavor of the type of people that are on the committee. First of all, we have someone from the City of Edmonton who is also part of the Major Cities Investment Regulation. So City of Edmonton is also able to have a expanded investment option. We have someone from the City of Calgary that is now vacant, was vacant, and we just recently appointed someone from University of Calgary who's quite involved with the University of Calgary Foundation. When you look at all that experience and view of how investment strategies are set and what the purpose is and how to execute on them, that's really the purpose of it. So hopefully that answers the question. Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, we will vote on the motion. And that's unanimous.
Our next report is the Special Public Services Committee meeting of January 31st, 2022, and again for information.
I'll move acceptance of the report.
Second.
Thank you. So just by way of a reminder, explanation, is that the Public Services Committee recommended a number of amendments that are being made, and this item will come back to the Public Services Committee before coming to Council for decision. Seeing no questions, we'll vote on the motion. And that's unanimous.
Item 9.7 is the Administrative and Legislative Review Committee of February 1st, 2022, again just for information.
Sorry, I'll make a motion to put this.
I will second.
Seeing no questions or comments, we'll vote. And that's unanimous.
Item 9.8 is the Council Employee Committee meeting of February 1st, 2022 for adoption and information with the Council Employee Committee terms of reference for adoption.
I'll move the acceptance of the report.
And I'll second.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll vote on the motion. And that's unanimous.
Item 9.9 is the Administrative Committee meeting of February 2nd, 2022 with the Strategic Planning Environmental Stewardship for a briefing note for adoption.
So moved.
Second.
Any comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll vote on the motion. And that's unanimous.
Reports for reception now. Item 10.1 is the Municipal Planning Commission meeting of December the 8th, 2022. Thank you.
I'll remove, I'll move the report.
Second it.
Any comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll vote on the motion. And that's unanimous.
Moving on now to new bylaws. Getting tired. For first reading only at this point, bylaw 4692, the Northwest Industrial Area Structure Plan to allow for the orderly and strategic development of industrial lands.
Your worship, I beg leave to introduce bylaw number 4692 and wish it read a first time.
Can I get a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, so I would like to remind us that this is just the first reading, so on March 7th, the public hearing will occur, and council will have discussion then, but if you have any clarifying questions at this point, they can be asked. Seeing none, we'll vote. And that is unanimous. There's no more further business, and this meeting is adjourned.